Google can be a great helpful tool, but sometimes you can find out the most disturbing and dark information on there. So while I rotted my brain for 2 hours researching, here's the PG list of dark things that you should never Google, and I'm warning you, be careful. So first off, we have the Radioactive Man. After a fateful accident in Japan's Tokamura nuclear power plant in 1999, worker Hisashi Uchi suffered immensely. When he arrived at the University of Tokyo Hospital after being exposed to the highest level of radiation of any human in history, doctors were stunned. The nuclear power plant technician had almost zero white blood cells and thus no immune system. Soon he'd be crying blood as his skin melted. Kept in a special radiation ward to protect him from hospital-borne pathogens, the profuse amount of radiation coursing through his blood eradicated the introduced cells and skin grafts could not hold. "I can't take it anymore," he cried out, but at his family's insistence, the doctors continued their experimental treatments even as his skin began to melt from his body. Then on the 59th day in the hospital, he had a heart attack, but his family agreed that he should be resuscitated in case of death, so the doctors revived him. He'd eventually have 3 heart attacks in 1 hour. It was only a merciful final cardiac arrest due to multi-organ failure on December 21st, 1999 that released him from the pain. Now this was 83 days after the incident. I can't imagine the pain he was in and why the doctors and his family kept trying to save him. Next up, we have green boots. Climbing Mount Everest is a very dangerous thing to do, and unfortunately some people who have tried to do it have met their untimely death. As of November 2022, 310 people have died on Everest. Over 200 bodies remain on the mountain and have not been removed due to the dangerous conditions. Now, as morbid as it sounds, current climbers use these bodies as location markers, and green boots is one of them. Green boots is named for the colored boot the climber was wearing, and he is a landmark on the main northeast ridge route of Mount Everest. The body has not been officially identified, but it is believed to be Swang Pajor, an Indian climber who died on Everest in 1996. All expeditions from the north side encountered the body curled in the limestone alcove cave at 27,900 feet until it was moved in 2014. Green Boots was moved to a less conspicuous location by members of a Chinese expedition. Now in 2006, British mountaineer David Sharp was found in a hypothermic state in Green Boots cave by climber Mark Ingalls and his party. Mark continued to ascend after radioing for advice on how to help David, which he was unable to provide. Now David died of extreme cold some hours later. Approximately 3 dozen other climbers would have passed by the dying man that day, and it had been suggested that those who noticed him mistook him for Green Boots and therefore paid little attention. Overall, it's just super sad, but I don't know why people would risk their lives for this. Now we have the Victorian British 8 mummies. Okay, so I've seen people talk about this before on Twitter, but I've never actually delved into this topic, and well, I think I should have left it that way. They first started with the Egyptian mummy, which was crumbled into a solution to stanch internal bleeding, but other parts of the body soon followed. Skull was one common ingredient taken in powdered form to cure head ailments. Even the moss that grew over a buried skull, called usnea, became a prized additive, powder believed to cure nosebleeds and possibly epilepsy. Human fat was used to treat the outside of the body, and doctors prescribed bandages soaked in it for wounds, and rubbing fat into the skin was considered to be a remedy for gout. Blood was procured as fresh as possible, while it was still thought to contain the vitality of the body, because yes, they used the blood for more remedies. Now thankfully the practice dwindled in the 18th century, around the time Europeans began regularly using forks for eating and soap for bathing, but all I gotta say is ew. Moving on to Carl Tanzler. I need to tell y'all about Carl Tanzler because he is just such a truly messed up man. In 1930, Carl believed he'd found his one true love. While working as a radiologist in Florida, he met a young Cuban-American woman, Maria Elena Magaro de Hoyos. She was suffering from tuberculosis and died the next year. Carl paid for her funeral and visited her mausoleum regularly. He was obsessed with Maria. Now, in the dead of night in 1933, he took her body from the mausoleum and back to his home in a red wagon. He put her skeleton back together using coat hangers, stuffed her with rags, and made her her a wig from her own hair. She was dressed and put in his bed until 7 years later, following rumors of the destruction of her body, and he was discovered by police. While her body was covered with clothes, her face was a death mask of her former self, created by Carl, and was kept in his bed after the coroner had removed the rest of her body. Now, unbelievably, the statute of limitations had expired, and Carl's case was dismissed out of court, but yeah, there is just so much wrong with that. I am just speechless. Now we have the chainsaw invention. In 1780, two Scottish doctors invented the prototype of the chainsaw. Now this wasn't cutting down trees or anything, oh no. John Atkin and James Jeffrey invented the hand-cranked chainsaw to cut through the pelvises of delivering mothers who were having trouble pushing their babies out. And to make things worse, mothers were completely conscious throughout the entire process. Now that just hurts to think about. Now those women were just so strong. Now after seeing how well it worked out in the delivery room, well that is according to the male doctors, the machine was then co-opted to saw through wood and other materials, gradually growing in size to become the chainsaw we know today. Now thank God we've made more advancements when it comes to giving birth, because just wow. Then there's the brain-eating parasite. Naegleria fowleri is a free-living amoeba that is so small that it can only be seen with a microscope. It is commonly found in warm fresh water such as lakes, rivers, and hot springs, and soil. Now the parasite infects people when the water containing the amoeba enters the body through the nose. This typically happens when people go swimming, diving, or when they put their head under fresh water. The amoeba then travels up the nose to the brain, where it destroys the brain tissue and causes a devastating infection that is almost always fatal. Now the first symptoms usually start about 5 days after infection, but they can start within 1 to 12 days. Symptoms may include headache, fever, nausea, or vomiting. Later symptoms can include stiff neck, confusion, lack of attention to people and surroundings, seizures, hallucinations, and coma. After symptoms start, the disease progresses rapidly and usually causes death within about 5 days, but the death can happen within 1 to 18 days. Yeah, remind me to never swim in freshwater again. The Highway of Tears. The Highway of Tears is a 447-mile-long corridor of Highway 16 between Prince George and Prince Rupert in British Columbia, Canada, which has been the location of crimes against missing and dead Indigenous women. Accounts vary as to the exact number of victims, but according to the RCMP Project ePana, the number of victims is fewer than 18, while Indigenous organizations estimate that the number is higher than 40. In 2015, the federal government launched a national inquiry into the cases. That year, Carolyn Bennett, now a federal minister of Crown Indigenous Relations Canada, claimed that the national number of victims in Canada is likely over 1,200, which is just insane, and it's disgusting that no one really seems to care about these women and girls. Now, the region of the Highway of Tears is characterized by poverty and, until 2017, lacked adequate public transportation, which forced many locals to resort to hitchhiking as a form of transit. Now, this directly resulted in some of the deaths and disappearances. Some activists argue that institutional racism and sexism have affected the searches for these Indigenous women, and we just need to put more resources into these disappearances. Now we have burn degrees. We've all heard of first, second, and third degree burns, right? Well, what if I told you there also existed 4th, 5th, and 6th degree burns? But wait, isn't 3rd degree burns considered the worst? Apparently no. 4th degree burns occur when heat damage destroys the dermis and muscle tissue is affected. Like 3rd degree burns, 4th degree burns result in scarring and the loss of keratin, loss of hair shafts and fingernails and toenails. 5th degree burns happen when all the skin and subcutaneous tissues are destroyed, exposing muscle. These burns can be fatal due to damage to major arteries and veins. 5th degree burn injuries also may require amputation due to the damage to the muscles. Permanent and prominent scarring with the loss of keratin in the area of the burn will also occur. 6th degree burns occur when the heat destroys the muscles, charring and exposing the bone. These bones are almost always fatal, and just saying that gives me goosebumps. That's absolutely horrible. And while researching this topic, I made the right decision by not looking up any photos related to this, so be like me and please don't look at them. Up next we have Richard Chase. Richard Chase was a disturbed man, and in 1976 he was involuntarily committed to a mental institution when he was taken to a hospital after injecting rabbit's blood into his veins. Now while there, he broke the necks of 2 birds he caught and drank their blood. Chase was then diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and after undergoing treatments, he was deemed no longer a danger to society, and later that year he was released into his mother's custody. But just a year later, he claimed the life of his first victim. 2 weeks after the first death, he attempted to enter the home of a woman, but because her doors were locked, he walked away. Chase later told detectives that he took locked doors as a sign that he was not welcome, but unlocked doors were an invitation to come inside. Sir? Okay. Now, he ended the lives of more people, eating their organs and other body parts and drinking their blood. He eventually was caught and arrested, and police who searched his apartment found that the walls, floor, ceiling, refrigerator, and all of his eating and drinking utensils were soaked in blood. He was eventually found guilty of 6 counts of first-degree homicide, and the jury rejected the argument that he was not guilty by reason of insanity and sentenced him to death. And lastly, we have the Lake Nyos disaster. On August 21st, 1986, farmers living near Lake Nyos heard rumbling. At the same time, a frothy spray shot hundreds of feet out of the lake, and a white cloud formed over the water. From the ground, the cloud grew 328 feet tall and flowed across the land. When farmers near the lake left their houses to investigate the noise, they lost consciousness. The heavy cloud sunk into the valley, and people in the affected areas collapsed. Over the next 2 days, people from the surrounding areas entered the valley to find the bodies of humans and cows lying on the ground. By August 23rd, the cloud had mostly blown away, and scientists soon learned that the cloud contained carbon dioxide, CO2. Now, when the CO2 concentration was 15% or less, people lost consciousness and later revived, but individuals who had inhaled more than 15% of CO2 stopped breathing within minutes and died. Scientists determined that the CO2 had been trapped at the bottom of Lake Nyos for a long time and then erupted. Now, in the end, 1,746 people and 3,500 livestock died. Well, that's all for our list of the top 10 dark things you should never Google. Which one scares you the most? Let us know in the comments down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. I'm your host, Emily, and I'm going to try to mentally scrub all the horrifying information I learned today. I hope to see you next time. Peace.